All right, so this is Wednesday, February 14th, and it's 8:01 a.m. Pacific time. And this is our second set of ORMAP training sessions. And this is regarding the parcel fabric. All right, so let's hear some homework. What did you all learn yesterday, or what did you find interesting? So who wants to go ahead and start?
I'll go.
All right.
I uh I didn't know about the stacking of multiple, like when you did the build. Like I had no idea about the build and the seeds and then having tax lots or subdivision. That was interesting and new to me and a different concept than what we've been using before. So that was
Yeah,
very interesting.
it's
Same
um
same with
it's
the splitting of the line and then it automatically showing that distance. That was pretty cool too.
yeah, good, good. Yeah, there's it depends upon what you're used to as far as how many layers you're used to working with and what your organization is looking for. But it is very interesting to see the way different people analyze and maintain their data. It is extremely interesting on that.
Yeah, we
So
were before we could never stack anything. Like you
yeah,
can't have two polygons, you can't have two lines. It was always an error, so it's just different.
yeah, and I think a lot of the reasons for that is because previously you'd have to go in and have one dimension, and you didn't want to have two dimensions showing the same line, even though realistically in the real world you often will have multiple dimensions for the same line. And I think it was a, more of a focus on creating that cartographic map than really about maintaining information about what you have on that data. So it's interesting. It is a different way of modeling, a different way of putting in place that. So thanks, Gabe. Who wants to go next?
I'll go.
Okay, Craig.
I thought the build process was really cool, and I like the example you gave of topology, how you want to build first instead of go through topology. And if I remember correctly, if you use topology first, you'll be creating something that's not tied to the record. Is that correct?
Correct, correct. And there's a nuance there. All right. If I have an active record, if I have something here, when I do that build topology, it automatically is going to go and assign it to that active record, even if it's not really the one. So if I go and open up my topology editing and I find something that's in another area in the county and I tell it to go and create something, if I have this record active, it's going to tag that line or whatever I create to this record. So it's always a better idea not to use those topology editing fixes to go and fix them when you're in the parcel fabric. I should note that when you're in the parcel fabric, it's better idea just to use the build extent or build overall parcel fabric and let the parcel fabric make sure they get related correctly rather than using the topology fixes. The parcel fabric, again, is an additive function. So it goes and makes sure that things that are missing get created. It doesn't necessarily remove the things that are in violation of the rules. Good one. Thank you. Thanks, Craig. By the way, did I say one or two? I thought I said two.
Two.
Yeah. So give me another one, Craig, real quickly.
Uh, well, you can't have a seed on top of a seed. I remember that
That's a,
one.
that's a good one. Yeah, that's another one. Yeah, that's very good. Yeah, and I'll take that as your two. All right. Gabe, think about what your second one is.
Yeah, I said the build and the stacking of them, the seeds,
Okay,
the splitting
you
of the
got it.
line.
I'll give you credit for him. Good. Okay, who's next?
I'll go.
Okay.
I liked the discussion about the parcel lineage, kind of showing the historical side of it.
Yeah.
Um, just kind of,
It's,
and
go ahead, go ahead.
I was just curious, how far back, I don't know the right words there, how far back can you show historical? Can you somehow put more, I don't know if you can convert over like older historic data or not.
So that's a really good question and something that a lot of us have struggled with. The first answer is how far back can you display? You can display as far back as what you've built in here.
Okay, yeah.
All right. But the second part of the question is more interesting. It's like, can you load historic components
Right.
in here? And that becomes a little bit trickier
Yeah.
because remember, on each of these, you have not just what created it, but what retired it. So you have two different things you've got to relate. You've got to relate what created it, and a record to create things you can fairly easily build, but then which one retired it on top of that. And that's a challenge. And those of us that are really involved with the parcel fabric are trying to find a way to go and put a workflow in place that we can reload historic parcels.
Right.
It's not easy to do. It is one on one on one on one, and it is very tedious. You could do it though. It just there's no easy way to do it at the moment. But yeah,
Gotcha.
it's something that a lot of us see as being really valuable, but most of us are just starting from this point and moving forward.
Gotcha.
Yeah, good
What
question.
about, and then the spatial index? I wrote down that it's like a grid that shows like data all displayed.
Right.
So that was kind of interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's actually sort of underlying inside of the Esri technology is the spatial index and how it actually works. But if you actually look at any of your layers inside of ArcGIS or anything else like that, for example, condo lines, if I look at it and go to the properties and I go to my indexes, I actually can see that there is a spatial index here. All right, has a spatial index and it's associated with the shape. And it actually, you can tell it to go and delete the existing one and recalculate it and stuff. But the way it works is it actually goes and looks at the overall analysis of where the big ones are, where the small ones are, what's the optimal size for them. There used to be um, in one of the versions, there used to be a way to go and tweak that a little bit. They don't give it to you anymore. All the best you could do is just recalculate. It's a statistical analysis of how to best fit all of those in. The easiest way to go in and and illustrate the reason why you have that is if you remember, if you're old enough to remember, Arc Info, when it started drawing in the upper left corner. And you would wait for it to draw all the way down from the upper left until it got into the area that you were displaying. And then it would draw through that all the way through. You had to wait for it to draw everything because there was no indexing going on.
Mhm.
Same way with a CAD file. With a CAD file, there's no real indexing as far as the spatial components. So it takes a long time to draw them. And it's the same thing. This is something that Esri put in, and it really has helped the speed of not just drawing, but selecting things. But a lot of people don't think about that, and it does have an impact. It definitely has an impact on there. Thanks for picking up on that. Yeah. Who wants to go next?
I'll go next.
Okay.
To keep it a little general, I've done the regular just standard Kogo on ArcMap for about 10 years now, and I'm just kind of an old dog used to a certain way, and this is a completely new platform. I like it as I see all the potential. It's way more sophisticated than before. I was messing with it yesterday, and there's definitely a learning curve here, but that's okay. But it's just learning how to ride a bike again, kind of. It's totally different. I'm not being critical. I'm just stating the obvious. I look forward to getting more proficient with it. Let's say that.
Yeah, we're going to go over today. I think we're going to go over today Kogo and the differences and why those differences are in place and what you can now start doing with them. And you'll see the importance of why Esri went and switched from string-based Kogo into numeric-based Kogo and all the tricks and things that you can start looking at now. Real simply, I'll go and I'll show you one. Okay, so inside the parcel fabric, I have the ability to go and say, show me on here where I have on some of my parcel lines a distance mismatch where the shape length is more than a certain variance away from the actual Kogo value on here. Now, you could never do that with string values. You only have to have numeric values on here, and it's actually going to go and show me, and let's see if there's any lines in here on this sample data. Oh, there are some in which I can go here and let's zoom here, and it will show me the variance between the actual shape and what's on here and looking at these. So let's go another one here. Zoom here, and it will show there's a distance mismatch between these. And some of these are acceptable, but others will show you that there's a variance in here. Why is there a distance in here? And it goes and it's a display layer, and it's nothing more than going to go and show me I've got problems in certain areas here. Why are they displaying different things on here? Again, that's because these are now numeric values that it can start comparing and calculating on the fly the variance between what's stored in a Kogo and what's actually stored in and what the actual shape lengths are. Something as simple as that we could never do before. And now it allows us to start analyzing our data, not just creating a map, but analyzing the data and using that to figure out whether or not we have good data or bad data. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Jeffrey. Good one. Who's next?
I'll go.
Okay, Scott.
And I am old enough to have worked in ArcInfo version 4.
Oh, I worked at 5. 5 is where I started. So
we're converting to 5 when I left the Forest Service, but yeah. One thing was to delete a record, you first delete all the features from the record, then delete the record.
Yeah, and that's best practice. You could delete a record at any time, but what that means is it orphans all of the features that are related to it, and you can't rebuild that easily. So best practice, if you're going to get rid of a record, first delete everything that's related to it, and then delete the record on there. And there's only 2 places to delete a record. One is actually in the record properties here. Okay. The other one is in the manage records, where you can go in here and you can tell it to delete that record. Those are the only 2 places you could do that. So, all right, good one.
And the other thing I thought it was interesting, when you were doing a traverse, you started the traverse tool, you even set the
ground to grid
origin point, and
Yeah.
then you set the ground to grid, which I thought was, I would have thought you have to do the ground to grid before you even open the tool, but
No, it's interesting in that the ground to grid will get applied against anything that you have active at the moment. So if I had actually created a couple of courses and then applied the ground to grid, it would still apply them to everything in my traverse. So it does provide some flexibility of when you actually do this. The challenge is with knowing whether or not something is being applied or not. Esri has gone and through the various iterations of ArcGIS Pro, this latest iteration 3.2, they're not showing me that unless I go and do specific tools, which I think is a mistake. 3.1, they actually always showed up here a little thing that said, you've got ground to grid turned on. It's going to be this much is the angular difference on there. But 3.2, I guess people complained about it being up there, and you actually have to be in a create or Kogo or Traverse to be able to actually see that you've got, or what that variance is, what that change of rotation is on there. All right. Is there anybody that that has not done a couple? Jeffrey Key, Dean, I think everybody's here. Okay. Are we good? All right. So today what we're going to do is we're going to start looking at tools. These are the tools, and we'll look at both what the tool is and how and whether or not it's aware of the parcel fabric and what the variance is and what it actually does during that. The first one, and we're going to spend a lot of time on this, is the Traverse tool. All right, let me see here. Yeah, let's go to Traverse tool. So let's start again by creating a new record, and we'll just go in and just call this Traverse and just use that. All right. The Traverse tool is located a couple places. It's under Partial Records Workflows, under Tools, but more importantly, and this is, once you get used to working with ArcGIS Pro, it's also on the Modify pane under all of the tools. It's down near the bottom under the Kogo grouping, Traverse there. All right. I can hold down my tool gallery and say, show me all tools, and that will pop up the Modify. It's interesting that Esri thought initially that this tool gallery would be a worthwhile widget, a sort of a way to get at the tools. I found as I'm talking to various clients and such, they really don't use the tool gallery, this thing here. The gallery, again, you move up and down through them. You can go and modify the space and the size of them on here. It just doesn't seem to be that useful, only because you can't see things. You don't know where they are. Instead, almost from the beginning, if you pull down and you go to all tools, it shows you everything that's in the gallery on here, and it's easier to do this. By the way, you can go and change the size of what you have and whether it's a list or not. I tend to use large icons just because it's easier in the recordings for people to see. While we're here, let's go and show you a couple other things about tricks inside of Pro. The first is, if I don't know what a tool is or where the tool is, there's a couple places I can go and search. I can go up here in the all tools and look under Traverse. All right. When I click under Traverse, it will go and find every tool that's associated with traversing, right? Whether it's just the Traverse tool or whether it's Update Kogos or Update Kogo on there. Also, if you're very top of your ArcGIS Pro, there's a search. That search is for anything, a command, a geoprocessing record, anything inside of here, it will go and allow you to find. All right, so I can go and find the Traverse there, and it will show me exactly where it is. If I look at, for example, under Kogo, but this one, it will go and show me, I guess I would help if I spelled it correctly. Kogo. There's a bunch of different things. Here's the tools that deal with Kogo. Here's Update Kogo. There's Enable Kogo, which is a geoprocessing tool. So when you're first moving from ArcMap into Pro, it's a good idea to start looking at these options to figure out what tools do I have. one of the things in Pro that's sort of disorienting is the fact that the names of the tools are different because Esri decided to go and focus on function instead of sort of the old tools that they had. For example, the rotate tool. There actually used to be 5 rotate tools inside of ArcMap. All right. There's only one rotate tool now. One rotate tool. It's a function. That's all it is. It rotates something. And it's located here. And it depends upon what you have selected as far as how and when you rotate things. So you'll see that everywhere. Things like dividing things. The divide tool now reflects the options that are presented to you are reflective of what you have selected on there. So, you know, they tried to go and make it more efficient as far as the tools that we have available to us. So let's go back to Traverse. All right, Traverse. With Traverse, I mean, I've actually got, Independent Consulting's got a YouTube channel, and out there we've got one workshop was focused on nothing but the Traverse tool, and it was like an hour and 20 minutes just on the Traverse tool. So yeah, there's a lot in here, and I'll try to go over them fairly quickly. A couple of things. The first couple of things is with the Traverse tool, you can create either lines or you can create polygons. I actually fought with Esri for a long time about this, and they said nobody's ever going to want to create a polygon with a Traverse tool. And I said, oh, yes, they are. If you're not doing parcel mapping, you just maybe doing you're laying out the polygon that's a result of a legal description, zoning, anything like that. You may not need lines, so why go and create them? So you can do lines, and you can do polygons on here. And you do want to go in and decide which one you want to create. The went over a little bit already, and yesterday when I illustrated the options here, there are the options for what the closure tolerance is. You can set this on the fly. For the most part, I don't see very many people changing the closure tolerance much, just leaving it at 1 feet, and then using instead this forced closure option to go and make it close whatever it is, and use that. There's also a shortcut inside of there to, when you're inputting values, to get it to close. The auto pan allows you now, and that's in 3.2. 3.2, they introduced that, so that now if I have a line and that line extends beyond where I'm actually displaying at the moment, it will pan over to the end of my line. It's a nice option they finally put in. There is importing and exporting using the ArcMap Traverse format, so that this goes and exports it out to a text file. It's a regular text file. It's got a txt suffix on it, and it actually has on there what the direction units, the direction types, starting point, coordinate values, and then the individual lines that you're doing. And you can export the one from the existing one, or you can import them and it brings it in. It's exactly like ArcMap, so you can bring any historic ArcMap Traverse files you want in. It's nice they did that. So starting point. I often get asked, well, do I have to go and click on something? No, if you have a specific coordinate value that you want to go and start that point on, you can right click here and it will allow you to go and put in absolute XYZ on here. So you can actually input the actual XYZ of a point that you want to start at. Or you can snap to the end of a closest endpoint, vertex, midpoint, or edge of a feature that you're close to. All right. Let me just go and start here, and it goes and puts it on. So we then have a couple things to do. We're going to introduce shortly the ground to grid. Right now it's turned on. I'm going to turn it off. Ground to grid. Ground to grid will allow you to go and take the bearings that are shown in a meets and bounds description and rotate them automatically to match your grid bearings that are in there. That's a nice option, but within the parcel fabric, it also records that rotation for you. So you get again, a record. You get the documentation of what actually happened with this. So let's start just with going in and on here. Putting in a direction. We can do north 45 degrees east. We can put it in using sort of the normal functionality, the normal things in here. The biggest difference between ORMAP Traverse and the ArcGIS Pro Traverse is you do not use tab. You use enter every single time you want to go in and move to the next column. So I hit enter, it then goes and takes that, and if it recognizes that as a value, it goes and displays what that value is it has. My distance, I can go and type in a distance here, 150 feet. When I hit enter, the second difference between ArcMap and ArcGIS Pro, when I hit enter, it actually creates the line. There is no sketch anymore. This is actually creating lines as we're going along. So I hit enter, that line is there now. It's there. It's not a sketch. It's there. So from this, I can now go and input another one if I know what my next bearing is. However, I also have the option here to use deflections. So if I wanted to go 90 degrees or perpendicular to this, I can type in plus 90. Plus 90, it automatically calculates it and puts it in there for me. I also can go and put in different values. For example, maybe this next line is defined as 10 chains. Let me go and make it one chain. Make it a little bit easier. One chain, I can now put that in, note it converted what I input, recognized it, and said, oh, that actually is a value of 66 feet. Let me go and put that in there. So let me go and continue. If I just want to continue with the value that it dropped down, I can hit enter. And in this case, I can type in 150 feet minus 66 and let it do the calculation for me on this. So I can input arithmetic functions inside of that distance field. Again, this is really nice if you have to go and add a whole bunch of lines and numbers up there. You don't have to have a calculator on your side. You can just go and input them here, and it automatically gives you the sum on that. Again, I can do 90 degrees to what my previous one was, and I can tell it 150 feet on here. I can also go and let's go and finish this out by going in 90 degrees, and I would now be, well, I did that 84 feet. I can now go, what is this? Well, let's do 66 plus 84. All right, but let's do 83 feet on there. All right, so it's 149. I'm outside the tolerance, so it doesn't show me that it doesn't close on here. However, I can go back here and I can put an asterisk, which is the symbol which is above the 8 key, or what those of us used to call the splat key. I could put the splat key on there. When I put the splat key in, it will go and automatically close it. it will still keep that value in there, but recognize that, oh, there is a misclosure distance here of this, and then automatically report to me what my misclosure ratio, again, the ratio is the misclosure distance to the overall perimeter. So there's say it's 1 foot in 599 feet. It will tell me what the calculated area is on there. All right, we good so far? Erica, good morning. So I have a misclosure here. I now have a couple things that I can do. With a misclosure that I don't find as acceptable, I can now go to my closure tab on here. The closure tab allows me to look at what values these things might be if it's closed. And I have 4 different options as far as how this could be closed. I have the one that I first used to snap the last 9 to closure, and it goes and snaps it. Or I could do a compass rule adjustment, transit rule adjustment, or a Crandall adjustment. All of these adjustment types revert back to old surveying tools that we used to use. One of them adjusts primarily lines. That's the transit tool. Others adjust primarily the angles. That's a Crandall. And the compass is a mixture of the two. So if you're an old surveyor like I am, I knew that whether or not my measurements were better or my angles were better, and I would apply these types of adjustments to that. For most cartographers, if you're going to put an adjustment, probably just do a compass rule. That's enough. Unless you know a lot of information about how this data was collected, just go ahead and apply a compass rule adjustment on there. And as you apply each of these, you'll actually see the variations of what the original lines are, what the adjusted values are, and any residual values as far as what happens to the angles on here. It does not change the values that are stored. It only adjusts the geometry of the lines, but it does not change the values at all. Okay? Just remember that. Any other questions about this? Usually I get a question, well, is there a way for me to go and save this and memorialize what adjustment I might have done? And the answer is no, there is no way to go and save information about adjustments to the geometry. The
Can
best
you
that we
see,
can, go ahead.
can you see the difference between what's stored as the Kogo value and what the actual angle is on the map now?
No, no. You cannot. Too many different variables in there. I mean, do you have a ground to grid adjustment going on here? Does this get moved or anything like that? There is no way to go and actually look at those differences yet. Enough of us haven't complained to them about it to say, yeah, that's it. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that when we get information in on a meets and bounds description or a survey or whatever, there's so many different ways to go and reference the directions or the bearings. You could have true north, you could have geodetic north, you could have an assumed north, you could have a previous reference north, a reference to a previous plat or something like that. There's all sorts of different variances in there to be able to go and record what it is. As to these residuals on here, the best we've seen, and I've got a client that does this, they actually go and create a screenshot of this and say, this is what happened with this one when I did that on here. But again, it goes and changes the geometry slightly on here. But for most cartographers, for most GIS people, that's not a real concern on here yet. Okay,
Frank,
yes.
what about like if you are doing a traverse, you're co-going something and it doesn't necessarily close, like if it's a, I don't know, lot line adjustment or something of that nature, where typically when we do it now, we have a beginning and an end point, and we, put in the COGO of the line. How, I mean, is this something we're going to go over later, or how does that work with the traverse in that sense, where it doesn't necessarily close the same way as your example?
So, Gabe, let me give you a shortcut. I usually put a story in here, but there are, if you have ever been to a carnival, there are the sideshows in the carnival. There are those sideshows. There's three people working them. There's the barker who stands up on the stage, who says, "Hey, come see the man-eating chicken behind us." There's a geek, which is the guy behind the curtain. That's actually the man sitting at a table eating a chicken, right? And then there's somebody out in the crowd, all right? They're called a shill. That shill is the one that at the exact perfect time, they go and they say, "Yeah, I want to go see them." And they motivate the crowd to go and pay the money to the barker so they can get behind and see the geek, right? You're a really good shill. Thank you. Thank you. Because that's the next thing I was going to go and show you, was what happens when it's not a closed traverse, but it's what we as surveyors call an open traverse on here. How do you handle that? I was going to show you. So really good shill. I know Erica was shilled for me yesterday, and I know you're shilling here today. So thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to show it to you. All right. So on here, again, it works a lot the same as it used to in ArcMap. There's slightly different variations on there, a little more options on here. Let me go and just quickly go and talk about this. So because inside of a line, a COGO-enabled line now, all of the COGO, all of these COGO values, they are no longer text strings. They are double word numbers. They are, double word numbers in here. They are numeric values now that are getting stored. And even the bearing, even the direction is a number. But inside of here, we now have, how do we go and actually want that numeric value that's stored displayed back to us? And we can tell it that we want it displayed as a direction, and the value represents an angle in either decimal degrees or gons or radians. Unless you're a programmer, you really don't pay attention to that. What's the north direction? Where is north on here? In this case, this is north azimuth. We want it displayed back in quadrant bearings and any decimal places. And you can set this, right? By default, it's set as, the direction is set as that is reflecting back to us. But for example, the distance field, we can set it that we want 2 decimal places. We want it to be right aligned. We want it to show separators, pad it with zeros, and feed in here. This is an interesting little secret here, in that inside of ArcGIS Pro, they're not storing these as string values, they're storing those as numbers. But I'm going to go backstage here, and I'm going to look at my options, and I'm going to look at units. The reality is they're actually displaying them all as, they're actually storing them all in meters. Everything is stored inside of Pro as a meter, or the equivalency of a meter. All right, so it stores everything in one format, and then it displays it back to you in whatever format you decide you want it to be displayed as. Okay, so that includes angles, it includes everything. It is stored in one format. That's how it can go and mix these linear units up how it can give you the equivalency of these units back and forth, because it actually is, they're all being reflected back in equivalency, not necessarily the actual value that you put in there. So when you put 100 feet, it actually goes and it converts that 100 feet into meters, stores the metric value. But when you go and tell it to display it, it's displaying it back to you as you've set it. And the best way to describe this is similar to what Microsoft Excel does. It stores a numeric value there, but it reflects it back to you depending upon how you tell it to format that column, whether it's going to be currency or how many decimal places or percentages or whatever. It's the same sort of thing. And this way they can internationalize the product without having to do any real internal programming or changes on there. This is all stored in meters now, not feet, not imperial units anymore. Okay. So that's the interesting thing. The other one is that there are a couple of COCO values that are no longer calculated as part of COCO. No longer does it store the chord length. Note it has direction, distance, radius, arc length, and something called radius 2. There is no chord length. All right. There is no central angle or delta angle on a curve that's stored anymore. They just don't store them anymore. And in questioning them during early testing, they said, no, the reality is that nobody was using those for labeling. So we thought it was unnecessary to store them, because using the arcade language, it's very easy to recalculate what those values are. You don't need to store them all the time. So they're no longer part of COCO. However, something called radius 2 is part of COCO now. Radius 2 relates directly to a spiral curve. Spiral curve is similar or is used often on both railroads, where you're going from accelerating at a very high speed and you need to enter a turn. So you change from flat, straight, and have ever increasing radiuses as you go around the curve, and then ever decreasing radiuses as you straighten it out again. That's a spiral curve. And on interstates, where you have, for example, cloverleaf interchanges there, you go from going straight and you enter into a cloverleaf, the radius on that cloverleaf constantly changes. It gets sharper and sharper and sharper until it starts getting longer and longer and longer as you're going to the other. So you now have the ability to go and store information about spiral curves inside of ArcGIS Pro.
And Oregon Department of Transportation loves spiral curves.
Well, yeah. As a surveyor, I know how to do spiral curves. I always hated them because it was a much higher level of math to go and calculate where you were on that curve when you had to go and stake things out. While we're at it, because we have finished this traverse here, let me just go and show you how to actually create a spiral curve. So let's go in here to create. And I'm just going to do a line, and I'm going to go here to here, and then I'm going to right click. And it's at right click that I have the ability to input a circular arc, or I can input a spiral curve. Spiral curve, it will go in and capture the value of this tangent distance. If I wanted, I could put the core direction in. I could tell it the beginning radius, the radius at this point, the end radius, maybe have 100 feet, and put in the arc length. Maybe this is 150 feet. And let's go to the right so we can see what this looks like. And you'll see on here what this is. Let's go and change this a little bit more. so we can see some more on here. There we go. It is changing and accelerating from a flat straight line into ever increasing. And as we zoom in on that, we can actually see that. So it's going and storing that whole thing in there, giving me the angle and everything, whether it goes to the right or the left. And when I hit enter, it's there. Interestingly, it gives us an approximation of the curve. This curve is actually all those little vertices on it. These are straight lines. These are not real curves because they still don't have a simple geometric type that describes a spiral. So they still do it similar to the way ArcView in shapefiles, it stores a curve. It's an approximation of the curve with just straight lines. But the COGO values for that, it actually stores those COGO values of the beginning. Let's go in and clear out of this. Go and look at this. The COGO values for this. Here is the direction. Here's the beginning radius. Here is the ending radius on here. So it stores those values for this. So you can now draw spiral curves inside of Pro.
But you can't do this from inside Traverse, right?
You cannot draw it inside the Traverse. However, you can draw it and it will capture it inside of the Traverse. Let me go in and show you. If I go to the Traverse tool again, not edit, Traverse tool again. Here's the other interesting thing about the Traverse, in that when I go and set this start, I can go and do 45 degrees northeast, 150 feet, 150 feet on here. Anything I do in the drawing side can be captured while I have my Traverse open. So if now I decide I want to go and right click and let's go and take this, okay, and draw a, come on, get in here. Right click and draw a spiral curve. All right. Watch when I hit enter in here, it actually goes and stores them over here, captures those values on here. Same way if I go and do a circular curve here, when I go and do a circular curve here, and let's just say 150-foot radius, arc length of 200 feet to here, and I hit enter, watch what happens over in the Traverse. It actually will go and enter those values for me. All right. So it captures what's happening in the display window and inputs it into my Traverse as if I'm going, which brings up an interesting point. I can go here now and I could go and click and say it closes to there. And it captured the bearing and the distance from those 2 points of the line that I just went and drew. So it's capturing those values, but inside the Traverse here, it's actually marking them with brackets. That bracket signifies to it that this is not something that you actually input, but it's something that was digitized. So if you wish to go and maintain that, you go in here and click on that value that's got the brackets on and hit enter, and it will convert it and say, oh, that actually was the value that I wanted. For example, I now have this distance that's been digitized. Well, maybe it was supposed to be a different distance, or maybe that's the one I want to put into my Traverse, and I can go and enter it and it will get put in there. So again, the Traverse tool, and Jeffrey, you're right, it's much more intense than the old ArcMap one used to be. And it's sort of imposing because you kind of have to know what to put in there. But it's much more interactive. It understands a lot more how to go and interact with what you're doing in the drawing area. Yeah. Okay, couple other things here. So this is just sort of inputting this. Let's go in again. Inside the Traverse tool, every time I click enter, it's actually got a line here. It created every one of those lines in there for me. So let's go and delete those. Let's go and talk about line curves and how to input curves inside of here. Again, let's start and let's assume that we have a curve now, and we're given the chord bearing, the radius, and another value on here. Because this is inside of the traverse, you have to have 3 components to go and input a curve. You need to have the general orientation of a curve. All right, so a curve can be anything from here to here. Those could be the same curve values as far as the radius and the central angle and the arc length and everything. But because they are oriented differently, it has to get drawn differently. So the first thing you need to know is, what is the orientation of my curve? Well, you do that by inputting here what this orientation is going to be. If you have an existing line, you can tell it that you are tangent to the existing line, or you could input the value. I'm going to show you the shortcuts before I show you how you can set it as a default if you're always going to use this. So the shortcuts. Let's say I'm going to use 45 degrees northeast as my chord bearing. Inside, again, you looking at this, there's a shortcut that says if I want to set my chord bearing, I can type CB after my direction. That will tell it automatically this is a chord bearing on here. Chord bearing, enter. With a curve, there is never a distance value input. Distance should always be 0 with a curve. 0. Always. Enter. Radius. Depending upon whether or not the radius is on, again, the curve is going this way. The radius is on the right side. That's a positive radius. If the radius is on the left side, that's a negative radius. So it depends upon whether the curve is heading to the right, positive, or if it's heading to the left, that's a negative. So in this case, let's put a positive 150-foot radius on there. All right, the next thing is we have one of 3 options. We can put the arc length in, we can put the chord length in, or we can put the central angle in, or the delta angle in. And let's just do a 90-degree delta angle. All right. If it was the arc length, I would put A. If it was the chord distance, I would put C. Enter. There it is. My chord bearing, note, that's my chord bearing. My radius is 150 feet to the right. So my radius is out here. My central angle, notice it said I inputted D, so it remembers that. So even though it's inputting it every single time, if I go and change this, it automatically will change the line that's been drawn, that has been drawn. That's still part of my traverse on here. All right.
I'm sorry, can you give me those abbreviations again for the 3 different
Yep,
types?
I can actually show you how to find them.
Yep.
So if on the bottom here, there's a hot link, a hyperlink, which goes to a help file. At the very bottom of this help file, all right, there is all sorts of overrides. There is the quadrant bearing, whether it's northeast, southeast, southwest, or northwest. This is for a closure. angles, whether or not you want to add an angle in here, delete an angle in here. Calculation shortcuts, you can do arithmetic in here. Curve overrides, okay? Tangent bearing is TB, does not matter whether it's uppercase or lowercase. I had a question here recently. Does it matter if you have a space between them? I don't know. We'll try it to see. So TB, this is telling you that that's a tangent bearing on that. RB is a radial bearing. CB is a chord bearing, right? The actual distance that gets input into the grid field for arc length or whatever, you can have a C for a chord length, D for a delta angle, or excuse me, D for the delta angle, or an A for the arc length. C is chord length, D is delta, and A is arc length. Okay. And then just distance overrides. Again, when you're starting out with the ArcGIS Pro Traverse, I highly recommend you just print this page. And I did it with our team here. We went and printed it, just took this specific component that they were looking for, taped it next to their monitor and said, okay, here it is. Until you get used to it, there it is. That's how you have to go and put these curves in. I'm an old surveyor, I know. So I actually remember inputting pure text-driven Kogo programs where you just had to know what point you were coming from, what point you were going to, and you had to input these with all these little codes in here. When I first tried the ArcGIS Pro Traverse, that reminded me of that. It's like, oh, this is going back to the 70s and 80s now. But once you've used it for a while, you appreciate how powerful it can be and how quick your mind adapts to that, and you can be inputting this as quickly as you can put things in. Oh, defaults. By default, all right, by default, you can actually set and tell it which of these default directions or orientations you're going to give it. You can tell it, I'm always going to put the chord on here. The problem with this is that it doesn't give you an indication of what's set as a default. So I always say, just go and use the override. Make sure that you understand what you're doing in there, rather than going and setting this default and saying, no, it's supposed to be that or not. Same way with the final one, you can set it to arc length or chord length. This one does show you what it's set to. All right. But highly recommend just go and use learn and then just learn to input them all the way along. Questions? This one's kind of, this is the trickiest one of all the things you're going to do. Do we have any questions yet? Okay.
So if the
Well,
curve is going to the left or the right, that's where the negative comes in. Is that right?
yeah. So if we look at this, and we use this sort of as, this is the orientation. I can't draw very well with the mouse, but there's the orientation on here. It's going this way. All right. And we look at, if we actually draw this whole thing out, this is the radiuses to the radius point here. All right. So if we can think of this way, it means that the radius is on the left side of this line. If this curve was concave this way, the radius would be over here, and it would be on the right side of the line. Okay. So that'll help us understand which way this is going, how it's actually being built on here. The good thing is you can change the radius once you've input it. You can always go and update this, and it just will redraw it. But initially, you just want to sort of figure out which way is it concave, which way is it going to be bending into. I'll often go when I'm talking people about this. I'll tell them, if you can think of the traverse as being a line that you're traveling along, all right? And I'm traveling along that line, and then I come to a curve. Which way do you turn the steering wheel? If you turn it to the right, all right, that means you're going to go this way. And that's a radius to the right. If you turn the steering wheel to the left, that means that you're going to go this way, which means that that radius point is to the left, and that should be a negative radius point on there. Negative radius. Just sort of, you want to be able to visualize which way that curve is supposed to go. Like I said, the good thing is put it in how, however you think it's supposed to be. If it's not, if it's wrong, just revert and change to it. All right. These things can be undone as long as you're still inside the traverse. Once you get outside the traverse, you can't change them. They're there. Okay. But as long as you're in the traverse, it remembers what lines I have in the traverse, and it will go and allow you to go and modify them. Okay. So let's go and look at one more thing.
So really quick, Frank, there used to be an option to choose to the left or to the right in ArcMap. Now that's just being replaced with plus or minus, negative or positive.
Well, actually, let's go in and do it. If we do this circular curve, we still have left or right. All right. And this is, by the way, a good little tip that if you're unsure, just go and open up, go over to your drawing area, right click and say circular arc, and input this stuff here and say, oh, is it to the right or to the left? And is this correct? What am I doing? And then if the traverse is open, when you hit enter, it automatically puts those values over into the traverse. All right. So it's a nice little tip as you're moving from ArcMap into ArcGIS Pro. Remember, when you got a curve that you're inputting here. Let's go back here. When you've got a curve that you're inputting here, you don't know quite what to do with this. Just go over here and go to circular curve. All right. And by the way, this is the one thing I hate, is that once this thing pops up, you can't change that. But I can say, okay, well, my tangent bearing, maybe I have the chord bearing instead. The chord bearing is 45 degrees northeast, tab. And my radius, I think maybe it's 150 feet, but maybe it's to the right. And my arc length in here. And once I enter that, it automatically captures that for me. Okay. So as you're sort of making this change over, if you're not quite sure what to do with the curve, just run over here, right click and go circular curve, and then look at it and say, okay, what do I have to put in here? And it will allow you to visualize it just like the old ArcMap one used to do. Okay.
Frank, can you repeat the three things, there was three things to traverse the line. Was that the three?
Yeah.
One was general
There's
orientation.
3 bits of information. You only need 3 bits of information to go and identify a curve. 1, the orientation of the curve. How to orient it. Is it
Right.
tangent? Do you have a chord bearing, a radial bearing, or a tangent bearing? All right. And what's the radius? The radius is always needed. You always need the radius in here. And then one other bit of information. And that other bit of information can be the arc length, could be the chord length, could be the delta angle or the central angle on the curve.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Couple of other things on here. So often, okay, often when I'm in here, I'll go and I'll, by the way, Gabe, I haven't forgotten you. We're still going to do an open traverse. I want to make sure that I see the rubber banding on here, so I can click on this and it will make sure that it's rubber banding as I'm in here. If I just start, it may not always be rubber banding. It might just be purely input from the traverse tool. So if I want to see the rubber band, if I want to go over here, make sure that you click on this line and you'll then see it, for one thing, on here. Okay, if I want to start a new traverse, I can click on the new tab down here, the new button, and it will allow me to go and set a new starting point. With that new starting point, all right, new starting point, plus 90, 600 feet, 60 feet. All right, again, showing you the panning as it panning to the end. Well, at any point here, I might say, oh, I made a mistake. I'm not supposed to start here. I'm supposed to start there. At any point, I can go and say, well, that's my start point. It removes everything that's part of my traverse over there. All right. It removes anything that's in there automatically over there. Okay. So by the way, can you see where I can spend an hour and 15 minutes just on the traverse tool? These all little things that are built into here. At first, it's kind of like, oh, I don't like this. I can't do much with it. No, you can do amazing things with this. So there's all of that. But Gabe asked me a really important question. He said, what happens if I start here and I end here? How do I handle that? Well, there is a set end or set closing point here. And when I do that, note the beginning point is red, the ending point or the closing point is blue. And I can go in here and again, this is so far off, but I'm going to sell it. I'm going to make sure that that last line closes where it's supposed to close, and it will automatically go and close up to that end point. All right, so if I have what's called an open traverse, it doesn't close around back on itself, but it closes onto a different point there. I want to set a starting point and an ending point. Well, how do I use this more efficiently? I'm going to go and get at it for a minute, and I'm going to set a series of lines. I don't even know what these dimensions are, but I have a series of lines. I'm now going to go into traverse, and let's say that I have a plat that says my line or my boundary line adjustment between these two is supposed to be a certain bearing and a certain distance. All right. I think this is what you were getting at, Gabe, right? And I can tell it, here's my starting point. And I'm starting there. My bearings, it is 15 degrees northeast for, let's see if that's 60, this is maybe 75 feet. All right. Then I've got maybe 10 degrees northwest for 50 feet. And it's supposed to end on this one here, oh, sorry. It's supposed to end here. I can tell it that's my closing point. And then I can input these and then say force my closure, and it will force the closure. Or I can, as I'm inputting here, I can tell it automatically by putting the asterisk there to force my closure to that. Or if I'm close enough and I have the dimensions, if I'm within my tolerance, it will automatically force the closure on here to that. So by setting a beginning point and an ending point, you can make sure that it automatically connects up. All right. This, by the way, is a great routine to going and inputting a series of lines connecting portions of or lot corners on here, connecting those up. You go and use the traverse tool, set the start point, set the end point, put the two between, and then say close it. Boom, make sure it closes. Because what happens, oh, by the way, I still have this, that's good. What happens if I tell it this and I try to do a seed? It will create one seed, but it will not create the second seed here. Only when I make sure that it actually closes. All right, let's go in here. That it actually closes here, that when I create the seeds would create that second seed. Even if you're off 0.002 on here, it will not create that second seed. There's that gap that Dean was talking about, and you want to be careful with that. One more thing with the traverse. And then I promise I will stop talking about it for a while. Let's go to new. All right. New traverse, go back down to here. What happens if I have an existing line that I want to capture what those things are? What are those things inside my traverse? Well, I have this thing called trace lines. Trace lines will allow me to go and select something and say, let's start here and trace here, 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 and here. And when I'm done, it's collected them and put them in. Kind of cool. I could actually go, and if I have Kogo lines associated with a parcel, I could go over to a parcel and say, trace them, boom, and do it. Be warned. It's going to trace whatever lines you have set here. So if you have that set for subdivision lines and you're going to try to trace tax lot lines, it's not going to work. It will only trace the types of lines that you note on there. So just be aware of that. You could always go in and do a trace here, but it's not going to be exactly the same. They'll be digitized dimensions. Anyway, I think I've exhausted the traverse tool, all the different things you can do in here. It's the number one tool, but you want to know that there's so much built. It's a Swiss Army knife. It really is. So many things you can do on here. Dean, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think as someone who's very basic when it comes to Kogo, that the thing I really like about it is while it has those many options, if I'm just going to do the basic curves and bearings and distances, it lets me fire those through very quickly with some just simple. I mean, I only use the dash 1, 2, 3, 4 for my quadrants, and it's just quick. And the changes they made when they went to 3, I don't know if anybody was using it back in 2. It was a little bit slower for some of the larger traverses. It's amazing to me that they built so many add-ons while keeping the complexity of just the basics still pretty simple. I appreciate that. And the other thing is I should have followed your guys' advice and built my own little sticky sheet to put next to my monitor, next to all my passwords that I never post, but that just tells me all the little shortcuts. That was a great idea. So no, I'm always amazed to play around with that. There's just so much there. But
Yeah.
all the basics are there, and it lets me do it fast.
Yeah, it's one of those things where they have discoverable shortcuts in here. It's, if you look at it, it looks really simplistic and you can use it on a very basic level. But once you get in there, there's so many things you can do with it that as you could progress on your knowledge, you begin to use this more and more, and you recognize how really rich it is as far as what they've built in.
And I kind of go back, Jeff, with your comments about there's so much to learn is, initially you just may want to hang out and just say, okay, let's just get all the basics in first and do several plats and partitions or whatever, and make sure that all works correctly. And one of the things that our cartographer did that was sort of leading the effort is yesterday you saw the overview of everything at the end of the day, and now you're going to be going through all the various parts. Is he actually wrote a cheat sheet for the department that said standard process for deeds, and just has the tools that they should be using to do that. And then he did the same for subdivisions, just so that everything stays in order. And for us, it was a bigger jump because we went from just maintaining the tax lot polygons to adding on the plat boundary and the lots and the tax lots. So there were far more steps than we were used to. A lot better data. And long term, it's going to be better. But again, it added things that we weren't familiar with. And so I really appreciated him having that. And especially when we have 3 cartographers with 3 very different skill levels. One of our cartographers is up on Arc Pro, but not on deeds. We have a deed clerk that's learning Arc Pro, and then we have our lead cartographer that knows both sides of the story. So that was just a nice way for them to kind of standardize and talk about, let's do things in a way that we can replicate and not get lost. And that was just helpful for them.
So by the
My story.
way, on page 61 of your slides, these are very, very high level workflows that we provide for all of you. And it really is only about 5 different workflows on here. What happens when you want to do a merge? Create the record, select the parcels, select the merge tool, attribute. Now there's other things you can do with the merge tool, but yeah. What about if you have a meets and bounds description? Okay, well, if you don't know where it is, create the record, use the traverse tool, close it, create the seeds, build the parcels, align them, clip them, and go and do that. Again, ultra high level, but it will help you through thinking on a macro level. What do you do? What happens if you have a description that says all that property lying south or north of this following line? Well, that's a meets and bounds description, but it's only where you have to put that one line in. Create the record, select the parcel to be split, copy lines 2, input the new lines, create the seeds, build the parcels, attribute. Again, ultra high level. We're not going to tell you which tool, but we are going to tell you sort of how to do it. What happens when you have an aliquot description? All right, well, you got a straight boundary. Create the record, select the parcel, select divide, tell it the divide criteria, select the edge, select divide, attribute them. What happens if it's a curve? Create the record, select the parcel, input the split line, either parallel or create or whatever, perform the split, attribute. What happens with a sub? It's actually option number 1, create the record, insert the boundary using traverse, close it, create seed, build the sub, align it, clip it, do it, attribute it. Again, that's that first workflow that we learned. And then what happens if you want to do a subdivision of and create the tax lots? That's the second workflow. Create or reuse the record. Select the parcel that's going to be split. Copy the lines to using and create the lines, create the seeds, build them, use sequential. These are really simple workflows, and it just sort of depends upon what you want to do. That's if you learn these 5 or 6 workflows, you got it. You're gold. Anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Just so what Zach did, our cartographer that was sort of the lead that was new to GIS, but not deeds, he actually took this kind of overview flow, and then he added all of the little pictures of all of the commands to use. So they would all go and select the right one. When merge, there's some options with merge. And they said, look, when you use merge, we're all going to use merge the same way. Click those buttons. And so just pasting in what the screen menus look like or little word descriptions that you can remember. And that has really helped them in that process. So just some thoughts about flow and all the different pieces. Thanks, Wayne.
Thanks. Any other questions on the traverse? There will be. There will be, but I covered almost everything in there that you might ever have an issue with. All right. So let's talk about then the one other thing is ground to grid. Ground to grid. Why does it get used? When does it get used? How does it get used? All right. Ground to grid is actually located. There's a tool that's located in 2 places. On the edit tab over on the right hand side is ground to grid. This is the main location for it, but also it's located down on the bottom on the ground to grid corrections. And the way this works. So let's sort of talk about what is ground to grid. Ground to grid is when you have something that you're inputting in, and it gives you a bearing or a distance, and that bearing or distance you've already mapped somewhere, and it's a different line. All right. So what it does is it figures out what the difference is between the one that's in your description or in your survey and what you've actually drawn it on. And it says, oh, this is actually -8 degrees. So every line that I input with this information on, I'm going to subtract 8 degrees from, so I'm going to draw it this way. So it goes like that. That's really what ground to grid is. It's applying some sort of bearing basis and rotating these elements as you put it in there. What the difference is, and this is, I'm going to pause. All right, so just be aware, Dean, sorry about that, but I had to make sure that we said that. That was not a good thing, that they said, oh yeah, you could always go and change your projection and input it in, and then not. It's not. You want to make sure that you use ground to grid how it properly is supposed to be used. So I'm going to go and illustrate here a use of ground to grid and what it's actually going to go and do. All right, we go here. I'm going to go and hyper exaggerate this. And let's say that I have a bearing, or I have a legal description that says that this line being the easterly line of this right of way is an assumed bearing of north 0 degrees east. So in my legal description, it says northeast 100 feet. And then it says 90 degrees, 100 feet, 90 degrees, 100 feet, 90 degrees, 100 feet, right? So when I go and put that in, it's going to go and show me that. Traditional cartographic process would say, okay, you inputted with that value, and then you go and do a rotate. The problem is the rotate isn't going to go and show you it's exactly how much you got adjusted. And that's important for things such as if you ever decide to do a least squares adjustment, it uses the bearing that's stored and any rotation or scaling that's applied to that line when it's making overall adjustments on there. You want to make sure that you store as part of the parcel fabric, or have the parcel fabric store for you, the adjustments that are being applied. Not just the bearing adjustments, but if in fact you're applying a scale factor. Again, from a surveying standpoint, I don't want to get too intense on this, but you want to make sure that it understands adjustments that are applied to lines as you're inputting them into your data. All right, ground to grid then. So let me go and apply a ground to grid to this and say it's supposed to be my legal description says it's north on here. And in fact, it's this line from here to here. All right. And I'm not sure, I don't remember who it was, but Scott, was it you that mentioned, oh, you thought it was interesting that I could apply it after I started my traverse? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. There's an interesting thing here, because while I have my traverse open, it knows that every one of these lines are going to be impacted the same way. So if I apply a ground to grid correction to this, it will say, oh, every one of these has to have that applied to it. And when I click and when I finish with this now, all right, when I finish with this and go and select, by the way, I have no active record at the moment. When I go and select this on here and I have these, if I look at them, I actually have, let's get rid of this. I will look at these and it will have on here my rotations. Same way, if I had done a scaling on here, it would store my rotation and my scaling it's applied on the ground to grid. If you change your projection, that doesn't happen. If you rotate it, none of that happens. You want to make sure that it understands that the bearings that are stored on here are reflective of the source document, of the record. They are not necessarily to be intended to be used for adjustments inside of here. Okay, let me go in and create a record just so we can finish this thing. Here, okay, create a record. Create a record. Now I'm going to go and assign all these to my record. Okay, then I'm going to go and create my seed. Then I'm going to go and build it. All right. So the interesting thing is, if I have a ground to grid correction set, every line that I create while that ground to grid selection is active on here, it's going to store that value along with the COGO values that are stored. And understand that these bearings that I have, they are not reflective of the grid values on here. They are reflective of a source that's being referenced. I will get off of my soapbox. Sorry. Ground to grid. It's important. It's important to go and do this. And it actually, if you use it correctly, it saves you steps for having to go and adjust things. And more importantly, because it stores it anything I create out of this, will automatically inherit those rotations and scalings. So that if that was a subdivision and I build lots inside of it, I can input the bearings that appear on that subdivision plat, and they automatically will be rotated. They will inherit it from the subdivision boundary and make it easier for me to go and input all of those values in there. All right. Sorry. Grounded
I like-
grid. Go ahead.
What I like about it is it allows us to work kind of like a surveyor works. All our deeds and plats come from surveys, and the surveyor who created the deed and the plat had a basis of bearing for that description. And it may have been true bearing, it may have been something else, but
May have been assumed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it allows you to go and input the values that are stored on the source document, but also relate them so that it understands, oh, this wasn't grid bearings, or this wasn't what my data bearings are. This is related to that source. And again,
How-
but
How does it differentiate from like the forced closure? Like they seem similar to me somehow. Does a forced closure not put those rotations into the record?
yeah, the force closure does not. Force closure basically is looking at the directions and distances and determining whether or not mathematically that closes upon itself and applying adjustments to those, because those issues as far as closure may have been directly related to measurement issues, or they may have been rounding issues. There's all sorts of ways that error can be introduced into those measurements. Some of it might be transcription, some of this might be rounding, some of it, other things like that, that because of that, those are more errors. This is not an error. This is, in fact, there's a different orientation. You're taking something alien and putting it into your data. And what did you have to do to adjust it to fit into your data? It's not
So,
eliminating an error. It's actually documenting that it came from a different place.
so say we're putting in a subdivision, we do grounded grid first, and then it's still a possibility for whatever reason that it doesn't close.
Yes. Oh, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, but
So
the grounded grid keeps the records and
it keeps it all so that you know where this came from and if in fact there was a difference. Now, I can tell you one of the ideas that's out there that many of us who have a surveying background have talked to Esri about is it would be really nice that these adjustments, this information here, that, by the way, that's the closure on here. Let's go and get the lines for this. That this information, as far as the rotation, there it is, rotation, that the rotation and scaling, that really should be stored in the record, not just on the lines, but stored in the record so that anything built off of that record or anything related to that record has this information about there was a rotation, there was a scaling that occurred. And if you're using surveys, good surveyors will often go and give you not just the basis of bearing, but they may also go and tell you whether or not you have a project scale factor. Because maybe some of these coordinate values that are calculated, maybe some of those are in place that these are not ground distances, these are grid distances, or maybe it's ground distance, and in order to give you the grid, you have to go and apply the scale factor. Okay, as it is introduces some of the geodesy in here of going and mapping on a flat surface versus actually everything occurring on the geoid. All right. So again, a lot of us think this information, this scaling and rotation really should be up at the record so that anything associated with this record automatically applies here. But and we can manually do that, but right now it doesn't it's not automatic, and we'd like to see if we can get that to be automatic for us. Okay. That's ground to grid. Before I move on, I'm going to talk about Kogo a little bit more. All right. And I'm going to talk about the labeling that occurs on Kogo. So inside of these Kogo lines, inside of these Kogo lines, there's a couple fields here that are important. We talked about all these Kogo fields already. Those are number values. There's a field called a Kogo type field. This is a coded value lookup, and it's called the Kogo type. And if I look here, here's the values on here. So ArcGIS Pro, and specifically the Parcel Fabric in Pro, not just is it storing a value, but it's actually keeping track of where did this value come from. And on the Kogo type, there's actually three primary options. One is this value was entered by the user. What that means is this is the highest quality value that you can have. This is one that comes from the source information. They transcribed it specifically from the deed or the plat or the survey or whatever. I can rely upon that. That's supposed to be reflective of the source document. The next one is from the geometry. This one is a much lower value. And this one says, no, they actually had calculated this from the actual geometry of the line that's drawn. This is what we call inversing the values in order to figure out what that actual length of that line is that's drawn. That means don't rely upon that. That's not a great value in there. It's just sort of an approximation on here. But there's also a third one in which it says, okay, what happens if you had a Kogo value on there and you did a split or divide or something on that? What happens with those? And that's called a computed value. The computed value means that there was a Kogo value, but something that you did or something that somebody did caused it to have a new derivative value on here. And we're going to illustrate all those and show you how the Parcel Fabric uses those. So this is entered from the source. This is derived from the geometry, and this is derivative from some function that you did. All right, so I'm going to go in here now, and I'm going to go and show you, let's go just to make sure. I'm going to go to my labeling on here. I wanted to go and make sure. It's here. Huh, I wonder if it's not in this version of it.
What are you looking for, Frank?
I'm looking in for the curve parameters, the Kogo type on here. It's
Oh.
in here, but I don't know. I don't see it in here. So I wonder if this is an older version of here. Let me go here and add this to a new map. So the labeling routine.
Yeah, I may not have brought the labeling routine over from the latest and greatest. That label.
Yep, here it
routine
is. So
I,
Kogo
it's a
type.
2.9 label routine.
Yep, sorry.
No,
So
that's good to know. I'm glad you found it.
yeah, so so I'm going to go in and I'm going to go and bring this over. All right. I'm going to show you some tricks inside of here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and so there is a difference between 2.9 labeling routine and 3.x labeling routine. They've made some revisions inside of this arcade code that they use. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and copy here. And I'm going to go back over here to this labeling, and I'm going to tell it to go ahead and paste the expression. All right. Now, when I paste this expression, I'm going to go in and make a change. I wish there was a way to go and expand this more, but there isn't. Show Kogo type, enter, there it is here. I'm going to go and take this and I'm going to put it behind. All right. And I'm going to go and take this, copy this, and paste this expression here. And here. All right. A lot of changing. All right. So this label expression, again, label expression is a very intense label expression. It's an arcade label expression on here. And don't save this. Don't save this one. And let's open up a new one. Okay. This is arcade. This is the new expression on how to go and do labels. So on here, arcade allows us to go and take the lines and pull Kogo values out, display them certain ways, and allows us to go and evaluate what's stored in the Kogo and make sure that the labels that get created are reflective of these values. For example, there's a whole set of settings up front here. What do I want shown? And then there's variables as far as what's going to be on here. For you as a cartographer, if you're going to use labels, this is the only section you need to be aware of. And the biggest things are, do I want to show the distance? And the odds are almost always yes. Do I want to show the direction? And it's either true or false. If I say false, it's not going to display direction for me. What direction am I going to be displaying? It's going to be quadrant bearing, so it's going to be a number 1. Do I want to show the radius if it's a curve? I can say true or false. What about the curve parameters, true or false? Show Kogo type. That's that Kogo type field that's entered from geometry or computed. I'm going to say true, and then what do I say? If it's if it's entered, don't put anything before or after. If it's computed, go and put a plus or minus afterwards. And if it's from geometry, put brackets around it. Those are the important things you want to pay attention here. By the way, down here, it also says, what size do I want this thing to be? Okay, those are the ones you want to pay attention to inside of here. If you really want to learn, this arcade will show you how to actually calculate, for example, specific bearings from where the lines are drawn. It'll show you how to go and here, how to assemble these string values in here for the direction, for the distance, for the radius. This is a really good, by the way, Jason did this. This is a really good label expression on here, how it assembles it all eventually at the end and then puts it forward. The only thing you need to know is that on here, I'm going to go and tell it a couple things. I'm going to tell it, let's get back up here. I'm going to tell it that, in fact, I don't want to, false, I don't want to go and show my directions. I don't want those to be shown anymore. All right, that's good. I can say apply it and this is on, oh, shared. Sorry, I want to go on the right side. Sorry. False. All right, my directions will disappear. If I wanted to, again, I could go down to this variable for the size, the font size and everything. I could tell, well, maybe I want this to be 12 point instead of 10 point, and every label will change on here. Every label for my tax lines. I'm going to leave it like this. All right. So on here, these 4 lines, and you'll see here, these 4 lines are entered. These lines are from geometry. They have been updated or calculated using the update COGO values on here. So as I go and do this, as I make an adjustment in here, I'm going to take this one line. I'm going to select that one line only, and I'm going to show you how the COGO type field, the parcel fabric, not only goes and puts the map in, puts the line in there, but it will actually keeps track of where these values came from. Here's the COGO type field, and I can say, well, that was from geometry. All right, suddenly it has brackets on the end of it, so I can see, oh, I shouldn't pay attention to that. Now, what happens if I go and I'm going to go make it entered again, but I'm going to divide that line. I'm going to divide that line and I'm going to divide it into 2 equal parts. All right. Now, when I look at them, both of those, they have plus or minus at the end of them, meaning these were derivative. These were computed values. They are not what the original mapper or what the original source put in. So the COGO values here are not just, oh, this is a value that appeared on a plat. You should look at it all the time. No, this is saying, where did these values come from? Another one of the reasons why the parcel fabric is so much better than just the old way of doing things. It will keep track of where these values came from. All right. Are we good? Are we okay with this? No questions on that. All right, this can actually be used for you. By the way, let's see here. There's a point here. There's no point here. So I'm going to make sure that I build this so that it replaces, and I have a point here. The symbology is showing me there's no point there. I can say, go ahead and build. It goes and puts a point. What's missing gets placed in there because I went and I divided that line, but I didn't have lines on the ends of it. Okay. there's a new tool here called Copy Lines 2, and I'm trying to figure out. I think I'm gonna break here. Let's have our break for half hour, and we can come back and I'll introduce this new subject, a whole new thing to talk about. So we'll go ahead and we'll break. We'll come back here at, let's say 25 after. All right. And you're going to have questions for me. We're going to talk about this more because I talked about a whole lot. There were a whole lot of questions. So I want you to ask questions about what we talked about so far. All right. And we'll start with that again, and then we'll move forward from there and we'll start introducing more concepts. We good? I'm going to pause the recording. All right, we're back from our break. So I asked you to come back with some questions or comments, and we went over the Traverse tool. We went over Ground to Grid this morning. What comments do we have? What questions do we have that we can talk about before we move on?
I had a question about the labels for the dimensioning.
Yeah.
And you showed how you could use the type to display them differently. But what I'm wondering is, can you use the type to only display the entered type and not display
yeah.
the other two?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I could just as easily go onto my labels and on here, I could go onto my labels for this. And it's a little weird in that there's actually 3 label classes as far as where the placement of the labels are. They have the left, the right, and the shared. And I'll explain that a little bit later, maybe today, maybe next week. But there's 3 different labels. But on any one of them, I can go back here and say, well, the sequel, here it is. And then I want to add a clause here that says that, and the Kogo type is equal to entered. And it will go in. This will only show me now the ones that are entered on here. Got it?
Good.
Yeah, you could just easily to go and do that. And I have several clients that go and do that and use that all the time. Yeah, labels in Pro, you got to love them. There's some very interesting things in here. Yeah.
But I noticed the ones in the angle brackets didn't go away.
Because they may have been, it might be that I'm actually displaying those. So let's look at my label manager here. And in fact, it might be that they were either shared or on here, that here. So I'll have to go and look at it again. Well, let's make sure also they're not labeling other components on here. The lots or other things being displayed on here. There may be other things being displayed, but yeah, it should have only shown those on here. Oh, and let me commit this also. Yeah, so I also want to make sure where this and comes in, whether this is an exclusive one or not. Let's put it this way. Is equal to entered on here, applied, and these are there. There it is. So this and was inside of here. It was not inside of there. So I put it in the wrong place. Oh, it still is not here. So how do I do this?
I don't want to get you too far off track here.
That's all right. Not able to. Still not doing it. So that might be, again, I'm not quite looking at where I've got everything on here, but that might be labels coming from another layer on here. All right. Let's go and undo some of those. Right. Okay, anybody else? What else do we have to talk about? Erica, you came in late. Why don't you tell us what your homework was? What did you learn so far?
Well, yesterday I learned a lot. I learned that I'm gonna love the clip tool when we get into Pro. And I learned that the annotation wasn't part of Fabric. I think I've always been a little confused about that. So that was good. And I was thinking about you this morning, Frank, because we woke up to lots of snow. And I was like, I bet Frank did not in Florida.
No, no. I actually, let's see if I can share this. See if I can share. Well, I'll show you my desktop. All right, at the very bottom of my desktop, you see a little something in blue, my weather app in blue. All right, you see it? 75 degrees.
Oh my gosh, I think this should have been an in-person class in Florida.
It wasn't up to it wasn't up to me.
Very nice. That would feel amazing.
Yeah, but it was I mean, it's cloudy. It's not, well, no, it is. It's sunny now, but yeah. Yeah. So yeah. All right. Anything else? Anybody other questions about what we went over this morning? Nope. Speak now. Okay. Let's talk about a new subject. Talk about a tool that's a parcel fabric tool exclusive to the parcel fabric. And this is a workflow in which it's called Copy Lines 2. Anybody that was involved with the old ORMAP parcel fabric, this used to be called Construct from Parent. Well, what this actually does is it takes a record, and I'm going to go and use this as our parcel. And when I have an active record, all right, I'm going to turn off my record just so you see Copy Lines 2 is no longer enabled. It's only with an active record. When I have an active record, I can take my parcel and it will allow me to go and duplicate it either onto an existing layer or onto a different layer. So let's look at the options here. Copy Lines 2. Depending upon what layer I wish to go and put this on, if I put it onto the same layer, basically it's the workflow saying I'm going to split this parcel. And it could be a single parcel, it could be multiple parcels. And so if I make it onto the same layer in which it exists, it does a couple things. It takes my existing selected parcels and marks them historic. Boom, they're historic. And then it allows me, well, let's do this. It says, okay, show only active. So it's only going to show me what's in my active record, and then preserve attributes. I'm gonna create a new record just so we can see how this really works. All right, I've got a new record here. I've got here we go. I've got no, that was something else I did. Here we go. I got this parcel, I got this parcel. All right. So those are my existing selected parcels. I've got a new record here, and I'm going to say Copy Lines 2. When I copy it to the existing record, it's only going to show me what's in this record. By the way, I think we're going to run into that issue. It creates my seeds and preserves them. So I have the same attributes on here. if I go and unselect this, I have the lines all selected in here. All right, and now I can go and perform either a split or a boundary line adjustment on here. There's a lot of things I could do here. Basically, it's a way to, when you're doing it onto the same layer, it's an opportunity to reconfigure the boundaries either between them or here. So let's go and just illustrate this. Let's go and I take these lines and I delete them. And I have an active record, so it's tracking what I'm doing. And I create a new set of lines to here. All right. So now what I basically have done is I have gone and, by the way, note, I still have this. I don't want that. I have told it to reconfigure the boundary between these two parcels. And now when I tell it to go ahead and build my active record, it will build this record again, recreate these boundaries with the new geometry on it. And if I go back here and say, show my historic, it has taken the old ones and marked them historic on there. All is part of this record. So this copy lines 2 allows me to go and do boundary line adjustments, but it can do more things than that. For example, I can go and let's go back here. Let's go back to copy lines 2. All right, this is my original. Now I have my active record and I go and do copy lines 2 and I take my 2 parcels and I do copy lines 2. If I do it to the same one, I can take these and delete them. And I can merge this. Boom, merge. It's the same thing as a merge. So I can use this workflow to recreate that again. I have my historic. So that's one way to do a merge on here. I can also go and take this, let it go and do it all back to that. I could say, well, copy lines 2, and you actually saw me do this yesterday. I could do copy lines 2, but I'm not going to do it to the same layer. I can do it to a different layer. So I can tell it to go and do it to a subdivision layer. It'll be the one layer I've turned on. And again, I can now copy those into the subdivision layer. If I go over to my add, I can see these are all subdivision lines now. Again, I could take these, delete these lines, and rebuild that. I've now created a subdivision there using the original geometry. So this copy lines 2 is a way to go and use existing geometries to either split something, to go and merge something, to readjust something as far as internal, just redefining that geometry on it. I can redefine it to a different layer. I can redefine it to the same layer. I can take this and now redefine this geometry into a lot layer and then go and split up all those lines for me and create all sorts of new lines on here using, again, an active record. I can go and say, well, let's go and do this onto lots. Same sort of thing. Let me go and turn off my subdivision so I don't see that anymore. Now here is my, go and show you, these are lot lines now. It copied them into a different parcel type, and I can now manipulate them however I want. I could take these lines and again, divide them up. I can create new lines between them. Again, these are lot lines now. There's one here. There's another one there. I can create another lot line. Here's a midpoint here, one here. So I can create a series of lot lines here. And then create seeds on here. So one of the things, I don't know whether you've been paying attention, but one of the things that's interesting here is that this line and this line here, which form those two, are not split. Okay, they are not split. It's not a requirement that they be split. I can split them if I want, but I don't have to split them. I can keep them separated, and then I can go and build these lines, these lots in here, using the new configurations. Again, copy lines 2 is a way to take an existing geometry and use it to build something else. Okay, so it's a very powerful tool, one that we use a lot, and it allows us to go and take and do everything from boundary line adjustments to splits, all sorts of things. Interesting, if you're working in an enterprise, this is a way to go and minimize a number of requests back to the server, because otherwise you're going and putting it in place, you're adjusting it, you're making all these changes on here, and then each one of those has to go back and forth to the server. We also do this often, in which perhaps we have a new survey come in of that same property. All right. And that new survey, it's really not a split. By the way, notice say that's not split out of there, but we have a new survey come in and it's got new information on it. Perhaps we want to record what that new survey is. So we'll take that, create a record. All right, create a record for it, and then we'll do a copy lines 2. And we'll copy it to the same one. All right, but this time we'll put what the new survey information is. There's the domain source type on here. Thank you. Where maybe this distance is supposed to be 650 even, and that's from the deed. And this one is supposed to be 30 feet, and that is actually from the deed on here. So we could redefine literally all of these lines in here as, and not this, we could redefine all of the lines in here as all being entered. All right, and rebuild it. What that did is it created a new record that says it's the same geometry, but there's different values associated with these. These new values are basically associated with the new survey versus the other. All right. So there's a lot of different ways to use that tool, the copy lines 2 on here. Copy lines 2. It can be used to the same parcel type or a different parcel type. Very powerful tool once you learn how to do it. To change the parcel type actually is sort of the opposite. It takes one parcel, it doesn't create a copy of it. It just goes and sort of moves it from this one to this one, pulls it out. So if I go in here and say, we'll take this parcel, and using this, we can just go and change the parcel type. And let's go in here. I can, where is it? Change parcel type and tell it that this is now a subdivision parcel. Boom, it moves it to subdivision parcel, moves it out of the layer that it was on before, moves it into the new one. All right, so it, again, because we have different layer types, different parcel types, it takes it from one, moves it to the other one. That's change parcel type. duplicate parcels. When we want to duplicate things on top of one another, it's the same thing. Duplicate parcels, by the way, is also a very interesting one in that it allows you to go and build stacked parcels. So, for example, we've got one of our clients here in Palm Beach County that they are building condominium units, and they're stacking the condo units on top of one another, and they're attributing them with elevation information. So they are building stacked condo units, just the units, and they are then displaying them visually as 3D condo units, and they can actually use those for viewer shed analysis and all sorts of things on here. That's duplicate parcels. Nice tool, but it's a little bit more advanced. Set current to historic, basically, as you've seen before. Let's go and undo this one here. Okay, if I set this as historic and current, let's go to attributes. Let's change this. Here's this. Here is my created by record. Here's my retired by record. If I mark it as historic, let's go display historics just so we can see it. Mark it as historic. It then goes and populates that value as historic and references the one that it's part of. All right, goes and retires that. And if I change it to current, it goes and does the opposite again. It removes that value from the retired by record. I now have, here's my current one, here's my historic one. It removes that value from the retired by record. That's all it does. But it's important. It's the only difference between historic and current is whether or not there's a value in that retired by record attribute field. Creating seeds. This is, again, you've seen me use this. It uses lines that are associated with the record to go and form seeds on here. Seeds are needed to build polygons. And as one of you remembered, I don't remember who it was, you can't build seeds on top of an existing parcel. So you can't do that. You can't build on top of an existing parcel. You have to duplicate that parcel. Shrink to seeds. Okay. This one is actually, you got to be careful how you use it. It's more of an advanced function in which, let's say I really wanted to go and rebuild this, but I didn't need to have an active record on here. I just wanted to redefine what this thing was. All right. I could actually go and select these two. And under quality, I could say shrink them to seed. Boom. All right. It will then go and allow me to go and shrink that to seed, and I can work on it. There's a corresponding tool called reconstruct from seeds that if I immediately do that, it goes and reconstructs them from seeds and rebuilds them. Here's the tricky part. Any lines that I create, the shrink to seed just kind of gets it ready to be worked on. Then my reconstruct from seed will go and look for any corresponding line of the same, come on, Frank. Of the same type. That is a tax lot. So when I say reconstruct from seeds, it will go out to the closest set of lines that was in there. So in this case, it redefined this parcel, but it kept this, would have rebuilt it as it was. So if I'm putting lines in here, I want to make sure they have records associated with it. That one does not. I broke that. And I want to make sure it's the same. So how could I do this? Let's go and take this. I could actually go and take and draw this line or change the geometry of that line using maybe the change geometry tool. Replace geometry tool, I can say, okay, let's go here to here to here to here to here to here. All right. And then rebuild it. And they all have their correct record information, the created by record information. So the shrink to seed and reconstruct from seed, it's an advanced tool that you use sometimes when you're dealing with redefining the boundaries of parcels, but you just want to be aware whether or not it has seeds associated with it, or excuse me, whether or not it has records associated with the lines that divide it. And again, reconstruct from seeds. All right. Delete parcels. I think we talked about this before. It deletes the parcel, which includes the polygon, the lines associated with it, any points exclusive to it, but it does not delete the record on here. So just be aware of that. A little bit more advanced tools. These are merge points tools. And by the way, all of these so far have been Parcel Fabric specific tools. Merge points tools. Dean's got some pretty good data here. So let's, oh, right here, look at this. So right here, I have a series of points and let's go in. So I have a series of points and maybe these points, maybe these breaks in these lines were not correct anymore. Maybe they should have been all one point and that should have been a direct line. There is a series of tools that you can use to do this. The first one, the one that people often think about, is the merge points tool. And that will allow me to go and select a group of points and then define which one of them I want them all to merge to. And I can merge to 1, I can merge to point number 2, or I can merge to point number 3. And it's showing me, it's previewing for me all the changes that will occur in here. If I were to go to merge to 2, it would redefine this line over here. It would redefine the polygon over here, redefine this polygon to here. So again, it lets me define what I want to do and how I want it to be done. All right. However, if you note it, the COGO values, it does not change the COGO values. It just removes those lines from there and removes the points and redefines the geometry. This is a nice tool if you have points close to one another that were errors, not if you have lines that had to have been aggregated together. All right. So that's one of the options for going and doing that is the merge points tool. There's also one called merge collinear boundaries. This one takes and evaluates lines, not points, but evaluates lines and merges them. However, it has the same problem. It does not redo anything with the COGO. Esri has come up with a better solution here. Let's see if we can find somewhere where we've got this. Oh, here. So on here, it's a Dean, the problem is some of the data is too good. I want nasty data. Okay, maybe this area. All right. So on here, I've got, I don't see yeah, there it is. Okay, so I've got a dimension here. Well, the dimension for this line, this top line here should go from here to the end, and it doesn't. It only goes to this one. The dimension for this bottom line should go from here to the end there, and it doesn't. Well, it turns out there is a function inside the parcel fabric and the parcel fabric only, which allows me to go and take, get off of merge points, allows me to go and take these polygons and tell it to reevaluate them and to analyze the lines that are part of these records and to see if it can consolidate the dimensions and the lines. This is called reconstruct boundaries on here, and it'll go, and you saw it actually just made a change. If I go and zoom in here now, I will see that this dimension up here changed. All right, it changed. See if I can do it this way. It changed from 592, 68, and here to 664. It aggregated those values and replaced them with a single line. The same way over here, it took this value on the bottom and took care of those. So it's a way to go and create and solve the problem that we used to call the backlots, in which we would have a subdivision where the lines were individually broken up and they weren't really reflective of what was on the subdivision boundary. That's what that reconstruct boundaries does inside the parcel fabric. So you think about the power of this, that A, you now have a labeling expression that will A, tell you where the COGO values came from, B, will evaluate them and say whether or not they're all in a straight line and replace the lines with a single line for that record and label them correctly as far as whether or not they're the same on both sides of the lines or different ones on the both sides of the lines. So labels inside the, let's go and do this here, here, and here. So if you're evaluating this, we want to make sure it's selecting both sides of the line, and we can then go and say reconstruct these boundaries, and it gives us the differences in here. I might have some other things in here, but it's telling me here and here, and this dimension here. All right. That is reconstruct. Merge points, again, if you've got a lot of, it's a way to clean things up. And it's a powerful tool, but you got to really test it for a while. Same way with merge boundaries, simplified lines and curves, reconstruct boundaries. This is the tool here that I just showed you. It allows you to go and solve the split line for a single boundary and replace it with the true ones. All right. The label expression, again, I showed this to you. This is actually a really interesting component in the use of Arcade to go and determine what do my labels look like? Where are they displaying? And they'll display on the right side of the line, the left side of the line, or on the center of the line if they are shared on both sides with the same dimension. Okay. Divide lines. This tool allows us to go and build a series of things. Let's go and take this. Let's use a new record on here. All right, let's do remember copy lines 2. Let's go and build something out of here. Let's just do it as tax lines so it's the same layer. Okay, and we can take this, and again, we can now go and divide it. When we divide, we have the ability to start at the start of the line, so it'll divide this way or this way. And now, let's say we want to start at the line, and let's go 200 feet. It will show you and display. Let's do a little bit more. So let's do 2,000 feet. Okay. So it will go and break it, shows me what a preview, shows me what's left over. And when I go and divide this, this is what I'm left with. Now that I've exposed all the actual Kogel type expressions, it says, oh, this one was put in by the user. This one was computed. That's what's left over. Okay. So now let's go back to divide. And this time, instead of doing a single value, maybe we do multiple values. And this is 200 times 8 times. Again, the same sort of thing when we go and do them and zoom in. Those were entered. That's computed. The next option is the varied lines. Okay. Again, I can tell it that I want to go 1,000 feet one time. I want to do 500 feet twice. So I can tab over to 2, hit enter. And as I'm doing this, it's showing me what's left here. So I can go 300 for twice. Again, shows me what's left. I could do 61 feet. Notice that it shows me there's a half of a foot left on there. And I can tell it to go and distribute or prorate this value across there. This is a very powerful tool on here. If I were to not do prorate, I would be left with a 0.6 in here, and it would go and show me, by the way, 60 feet, 1 feet. There you go. It would show me that that was computed and left over. So it allows me to go in and define, when I'm dividing a line up, how do I want that line divided? All right. And I have all of these options. I can do a single value. I can do multiple values. I can do varying values. I could share with you that almost never do I use the single value, because even if I want to go and divide this thing up into 2,000 feet and then 660, 160, I will use the varying and do 2,000 feet. And then I will look here and I will use the 660 1.6, and I'll make sure it's distributed. And now the reason why I do that is both of them are entered now. It reflects that I entered it. It didn't get computed on here. So I almost always will use the varying distances to fill in what that thing should be. Questions? Somebody brought your camera back on, so I wasn't sure. Okay, dividing a polygon. This one I loved. So let's go and let's go build that. What the heck? All right, so we have a parcel now. Turn off our historic. So let's go and with a record, select this parcel, this polygon. I now have selected a polygon and I have the divide rather than just the lines. If I have the lines, it gives me the line options. If I have the polygon, it gives me the polygon options. Now this one, this, by the way, is number 3 as far as our workflows. Create the record, select the parcel. Now we're going to create an aliquot portion of this. So let's say we want to take the north 500 feet of this parcel. We tell it, there's the polygon. We're going to go a width. That width is going to be 500 feet. And we then tell it what edge to come from. Come from this edge. It goes and shows us the preview, shows us what the breakdown is going to be. When I do this, because I have an active record, it will split these two. It will mark the existing parcel historic. It will split these two, create a new line, and create points at the ends of that line. That new line is exactly 500 feet perpendicular to that line. All right. So now I have the two lines. Let's go here. I have the two lines. I have a line in here, and I have points on the ends of those lines. Notice it does not split that line. That line has remained as it says because I told it just do the divide that way. Don't split the line for me. If I wanted the line split, I could have told it to do line intersections instead. That one is really cool. Okay, so again, let me do the same sort of thing. Let's go and do a divide on here. The difference is, let's say I want to take a, yeah, let's do 300 feet. I can do it with one of the edges, so I could tell it to go here, or I could tell it to go here, or I can draw a line and say, well, actually, I want to go here, and it'll go and divide it that way. So it will divide it from the line that I create. Unfortunately, that can only be a straight line right now. It can't be a curved line. So what happens if I want to go and create, 50 feet from here, 50 feet from here, and 50 feet from this edge? I have to use a different tool. I have to do it differently. Divide polygons. You'll use it a lot when you're going divisions of that. Just remember that this division of polygon does not divide the lines. It only creates the new lines you're creating. Split. With an active record, I can do a split tool. This is the split tool here. The split tool allows me to do it interactively, in which I can tell it, here is my line for splitting, and I can define it and say finish. With an active record, it goes and splits the polygons and goes and splits it using that new line, and it creates, this is a polyline here. It doesn't create Kogo lines. It creates a polyline in between here, and it creates the points at the ends of those lines. It also split the lines, I believe. No, I didn't tell it to do it without a selection. No. So I can do it by interactively splitting. I can also go and take that with an active record and say, I want to draw a line and tell it to use that for my split feature. It could be an existing line on here, or it can be a new line. So if I go and do a split now, I'll tell it that's my intersect, and what do I want to split? I want to split that thing here. Tell it to split it. We'll go and split it with those lines. The split tool will allow it to go and create those lines in here. It does create historic for me, just to let you know, because I have an active record. Don't stop me. I'm just going to keep going. It's going to keep rolling. Adjust parcels.
I did have a question.
Yes, please. Thank you, Scott.
If you could back up a little bit, you skipped right over the Slacka tool. Simplify a lot.
I
Yeah,
don't like it.
I don't like it either because this doesn't work very well for me, and I wasn't sure if it's my data or
It's does not work very well. And I try not to include it, but almost everybody asks me about it because they hear enough about it. The Slacker tool. The simplify straight lines and curves. So it's a way to go and take lines and densify curves and convert them into straight lines or curves. It's a way to go and identify and fix curves. Do we have any curves in here? Any densified curves in here?
Dean's probably cleaned those all up. Yeah.
Hey, I'm almost sure he has. But you know what? I'm going to go and create one.
It should be pretty clean.
It's just too clean. It's just too clean. So let's go into a line here. And then let's go and create curve. And let's do another line here. All right. Take that. And let's go and buy. I think it might actually be, nobody wants to do this ever. So let's do this. Let's take this one thing that I have selected. Oh, tax lot lines, do it by distance since every okay. So let's densify this thing. Okay. Looks clean, looks nice, doesn't it? In fact, let's go and if we do edit vertices on here, get rid of this. Go and edit vertices on here. In fact, it didn't do it. Why didn't it do it? Select the features, densify. 1 foot. Oh, it still didn't densify it. It's the densified that I'm looking for. Huh. Anyway.
So while you're looking, where I found a good use for Slacker is on my cartographic lines. We entered in a lot of our hooks, our dimension hooks, as curves, and they were pretty sloppy. And so in that particular case, we use Slacker on them. And my recommendation on Slacker, if you're going to use it, keep your tolerances very, very tiny, and do lots and lots and lots and lots of testing. In one of my conversions, and I think Scott, in the conversion notes I wrote for you guys in that demo, I do have the option to use Slacker, and there's some notes in there. I can look that up. I think your data's on my other machine. Nope, here it is.
So here's my thing. All right, if I'm going to clean up, I'm not going to go and batch clean up my entire data set by using one setting, because the odds are there were different densifications component on it, different curves. There's a whole bunch of different components on it. So I want to go and I want to evaluate and make sure that I have as clean a data and get it as close as possible so that, and I'm going to show you how this works. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to symbolize this line feature class so that I can see the vertices on here. So I'll do that by going to symbology and tell it here that I want to go and put a structure in place that has an extra marker. Actually, for a line feature class, I'm actually going to use 2 markers, and I'm going to set them on here. Who wants this? I'm going to set this so that for this one, let's set it as red, and let's set it at 5 points. And let's set that marker placement on the exterior of it. All right. Sorry, wrong place for color. All right. On here. And then I'm going to take this other set because lines are pretty different. And I'm going to make that green so we can see the difference on it. And I'm going to make that same thing. I'm going to make it 5 points. All right. And I'm going to set those not along the line. I'm going to set it on the vertices. All right. So I now have my lines being displayed, and you can see I did densify that a lot. All right, so when I have this line, these are all short little line segments inside of here. If I run the Slacker tool against this, the simplify by straight lines. All right, I just want to use my selected record of what I have on here, and I have 3 lines on here, and I need to tell it some components. It basically is looking for offsets to go and calculate whether or not it's a curve or not, whether or not it's going to create curves. And there's some default settings in here. Again, these settings are there's a multitude of settings, and when you set one, you might impact the other ones. Let's go and start with a 1 foot maximum offset. All right. And let's run it. All right. I can tell it to go ahead and run this. Now, what that did is in this case, it ran, and because my lines started out pretty clean, it kept them pretty clean. And it converted them and took all those little straight lines and didn't necessarily generalize them, but it created them so that they are more of reflective of what's in there. It's a circular arc. The problem is, and by the way, this could be run against not just lines, it could be run against polygons and such. Again, the problem is what happens when there's just a small change here between the two, and it starts assuming that that curve continued through here, or there was enough of a variance in here, enough of an angle that that's now part of a curve that it's going and converting. There's no real change. There's no real way with the Slacker tool that you can actually go and control what's going on. There is no way to do that. All right. We do not recommend using the Slacker tool at all, ever during this. However, and I know that when somebody's going and looking at this and saying, well, I've got to clean up this whole database. Sorry, we use a different approach. We don't batch change anything. Instead, we will go and evaluate this using a different tool. This different tool we're going to use is actually called Align Features. Now, Align Features tool. I have a record here. So the Align Features tool, what this will do is this will allow me to go and draw a line, draw a feature Let's go and select these here. Do that. I can do this without a selection. Let me go in and unselect everything. Without a selection, I can do this, which is the first tip. Because if you have underlying layers, you want to clean that up. Also, if you clean up a line, you also want to clean up the polygon that's associated with it. So if you tell it, do this without making me do a selection, and then I can tell it, I'm going to draw what I think the new geometry should be, what I want you to replace this with. By the way, I'm going to go in and update my tolerance a little bit. Okay. So I'm going to go and draw, and I want to start here, and I want to go to here, and then I want to go and do a curve, and I'll define where that curve ends, and then I want to go straight again here. And then I tell it what my tolerance is. In this case, let's go and let's do something so you can see. Let's do a 50-foot tolerance. The reason why we use this tool is that it gives us better control over what gets changed, when it gets changed, and what the result is. And it goes and allows us to do it selectively, vertically through all the layers that are turned on. So I can now tell it, go ahead and take those and redefine them that way. The reason why it also gives us an option, and I'm going to go and undo that again, is I now have this option to go and say, okay, let's go and maybe there was a problem with the initial mapping. Maybe it was supposed to come to here, and then there's supposed to be a curve here that goes to here, and I can tell it what the radius should have been. So I can individually look at this option and say, well, that's supposed to be a 750-foot radius in there, and then this is supposed to be here. So I can redefine it, and it will go and take every feature that it intersects within that tolerance and correct it. It takes time. It takes time, and you're looking at them individually, but you then have the option to fix it right versus fixing it fast. Okay, I can say, go ahead and do this. And now if I take these lines, and if I go and calculate update COGO on them, all right, it now has the correct value here. So again, when we're building, when we're looking and evaluating, if we want to do it right, we want to do it only one time, we will do it and we'll look at each individual curve, each instance of it, and make sure that we get it right. And we'll make sure that it goes and propagates the same way down all the layers, up and down, that's inside of our data set. I'll finish. Okay. Dean, go ahead. You want to say something?
Yeah, well, three things, and hopefully I can remember three things long enough to say them. Some of our data that came from Intergraph, which some counties have, are inherently, and so I do run SLACA, but when I run the SLACA, the tolerances are virtually the tolerances of the data. So if I'm going to simplify COGO lines, it may be 0.03 as my distance apart. And again, it is a least common denominator just to clean up some of those really messy graphic things. The second thing I do, though, is I will run it on the cartographic lines. So we have a lot of hooks and things like that that were made, again, in Intergraph before these folks got their data. And who cares if they move a tiny amount?
Yeah,
And
cartographic lines is no problem.
But I guess the third one is that, you know, I've been working with Jeff and Gabe now over the last few months on their data conversion. It's only Jeff and Gabe. And Gabe, how many tax lots do you guys have?
We have like 42,000 roughly.
Which isn't a ton, but lots of curves, and it's just those guys. And so what is your recommendation? So are they cleaning up their data? Is your recommendation, because you've done this so much more than I, as they're doing new transactions, they clean up the data in that area and they say, you know what, the old stuff always worked, it's gonna work some more. Just wanted to see if you could give us some advice on that.
Good point. So, I make sure that when we talk to our client, our potential client about this, we talk about this and the fact that, okay, let's start with this. Right now, you and the general public, the users of your data, do not see the ends of your lines. They do not see the vertices on those lines, both because ORMAP hides them from you and the fact that you don't have corresponding lines nor the symbology for those. So nobody else knows about this other than you, the mapper, okay? So it's not something that's going to be a problem if you continue to give them the same data that you have now. First thing. Second thing, is it essential for you to clean them up right now or to develop the process to clean them up? In going and migrating your data into the parcel fabric, it is not essential for you to clean it up. You can bring it in with densified curves and it works just fine. Matter of fact, if I go back here and I do align features and undo it, so I have straight lines in here, I have here, let's go and finish this. And these are tax lots. You can see my it's I know I'm outside the extent. I don't care about that. Let's go back here and let's create my seed and let's build this. I can build this. I can build this, and in fact, all that I'm left with is additional points on each one of those lines. I need to know that I'm not going to go and calc the COGO on these lines, but bringing it in, and again, you'll often hear me say this is used worth the squeeze. At the beginning, is it worth it to clean this up, or is it more important to get it into the fabric? The reality is, it's best to get it into the fabric and then have the ability to clean it up. So once it's in the fabric, as you can see now, these lines, these polygons are built in the fabric. Now I can go and clean them up. Let me go and show you the cleanup routine in the fabric. It is a specific routine. Again, align parcels, align features. I'm going to go and close and not have an active record on here. All right, I'm going to go, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go and turn off my topology because I'm going to be deleting lines. I'm going to be changing the geometry. And when I do that, my topology will give me errors. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and draw my curve. All right, I'll draw my curve with my tolerance on there. If I know what that curve is supposed to be, it's at this point during the cleanup that I can go and say, yeah, let's clean this up. Let's go in and put it on there. But if I don't, I just want to get rid of that densification on it, I'll go ahead and do this. So now I go ahead and do the align. Now what the align did is it went and deleted all the vertices, replaced the geometries of everything associated with that with this new geometry. It also cleaned up excessive vertices here, and it did it while it's in. Now, if I had split lines there, split curve there, and I had actual individual points, I would then go in there and I would select those lines that had been impacted, and I would delete them. And then I would tell it to go and rebuild my extent and have it automatically create the new lines that were true curves, that were reflective of what that curve was actually on there. So you can clean this up using this same routine after it's in the fabric, as well as you could do it before it's in the fabric. It depends upon at what stage we are in the conversion as far as how we go and provide it. But I hate the Slacker tool. I hate the Slacker tool. I literally have some clients, and I feel so bad for it because I was using the recommendations at that time. Oh, you correct everything with the Slacker tool. So I did that, and some of these lines, they're curves. They're curves now. And now I corrupted my client's data, and that bothers the bejesus out of me. Don't ever do that as a consultant. You never go and make your data worse. You only make it better. So we do not use the Slacker tool for anything. Again, Cardo lines, yeah, that's good. But real data, no Slacker. Go and
You know,
make sure you
I
do
so
no harm.
appreciate it. You know, this is, I'm gonna try to figure out how to pass this on to a lot of counties, because these are very important issues that everybody talks about in the conversion process, and really, how do you look at the data review once it's gotten through? And so this is good stuff, and Gabe and Jeff and I are going to be talking more tomorrow
So
on
it's
data conversion. Thank you.
yeah, so there's a couple things, and I can editorialize here. So the Align Features tool is an amazing tool. It's the tool that caused Panda Consulting to start using Pro, was that tool. It was at 1.2 that it was introduced. Amazing tool to clean data up. But again, I can editorialize. So much of the recommendation from Esri's and other business partners is do the data cleanup quickly to get it in there, and then worry about it cleaning up after you're done. And there's some validity to that. If it's so critical that you put that parcel in the data immediately. But our belief is always that you never make data worse. You only, every time you touch it, you make it better. Make it better. Make it better. Every time you do it, so that recognize that when you're doing this, if you have to get it into the parcel fabric immediately, great. Put it in there. Don't use Slacker against it. And then evaluate, once it's in there, evaluate, and you can clean them up with what we commonly call an evergreen process. You start cleaning seed and planting seeds here and here and here. You make your data better slowly but surely as you go along. Don't ever make your data worse. Only make it better. Yeah, sorry, Scott. So you see, that's one of my soapbox things.
Glad I
Oh,
asked.
it drives us crazy. And yes, we might say it's going to take a little bit longer to do the cleanup or to do the conversion, because we want to go and make sure you understand we're going to do it right. We're going to do it right, and we're going to treat it as if it was our data. Always think of your data as being heritage, right? This is not something you're going to go and do here and then another couple weeks later redo it again and redo it. No, you want to go and make sure every time you touch your data, you're making it better, not worse. Okay.
So I'm glad I asked.
Sorry. Sorry, Dean. Sorry, yeah. You could tell how passionate I get about that.
I very much appreciate it.
Yeah.
Like I say, I spent an awful lot of time on Slack with ESRI support to try to extract out how the options even work. And yeah, anything that makes straight lines curvy is not a good thing. So thanks.
No, not at
Appreciate it.
all. Not at all. So let me go back here and see if I think I have it somewhere. Yeah, here I actually have a file that I have. Where is it? Is it down here? Simplify settings. One of our many iterations of going through here. It's like, okay, this is the settings, and you note that we had a 1/10 of a foot, and we had a 10 feet here and 4 feet, and we ran through this, and oh my gosh, it was just trying to go and identify it, and to the point where we finally said, there's just no way to do a batch cleanup on this to make it consistent. You just can't do it. It's better to do it one by one by one. Do it, make it better each time using Google's motto, do no evil. Don't ever make something worse. Just always make sure you make it better. Okay. All right. Slack a tool. Do it right. Oh, I like that, Erica. Do it right. Don't be a slacker. I love that. I might take that. I might use that. Yeah. All right. Adjust parcels. Let's use the rest of 18, 20 minutes here to talk about adjust parcels. This is a really interesting tool. Okay, so while we have, let's go in here. And let's create a parcel. All right, let's go and create a record. And let's create a record here. Let's go and cheat a little bit and do it by creating a polygon. And then, okay, and then we can go and build this. So it creates our lines and everything else for us. Great. Okay. We have a parcel here and it's not in the right place. How do we put it in the right place? There is a function here called align parcels. It's a really powerful tool and it works really nicely, except there's limitations on it. You have to understand how this works. And I started to explain this yesterday with Erica, that if you ever use the ORMAP parcel fabric, you understand sort of some of the concepts. They had a tool called a join tool, where you would tell it this point would go over here, this point would go here, this point would go here. And if there was a corresponding point, it would go in and adjust it to fit that corresponding point. If there was no point, it was what they called a line point, and it would move it so it would connect it to the line. Well, it turns out that this tool has that same function, and it's actually split into two primitive tools that are combined together. The first one is links and anchor points. This is the transform tool. The second one, the point to edge, this is the align features tool. Let me go and show you. All right. So the transform tool, this tool here, and this is non-parcel fabric. This is just simple ArcGIS, ArcGIS Pro. The way this works is any selected feature, let me go and select all these just so we can see how it's going to work on all of them. Any selected feature, what I do is I go and I create a series of links. Now, when I go and initiate the transform or the align parcels tool, it will make sure that there is 2 feature classes in my table of contents. One is called the anchor points and the other one is called the links. If it's not there already, it adds them. So what I do on the transform tool is I tell it that this point is supposed to connect to here. And note it's telling me how far apart they were. And then I can tell it, well, this point is supposed to go here. And this point is supposed to go here. Well, this is doing a transformation on the selected features. And depending upon the number of links you get, there's different types of transformations you can do. Think of this as georeferencing the features that you have selected. You tell it where all these things get stretched to and such. The transformation methods you have is you have an affine transformation, which is the most rigorous mathematical transformation that occurs, or you have a similarity both in 2D or in 3D, or you have rubber sheeting, or you have rubber sheeting linear or nearest neighbor. These are all sorts of ways of rubber sheeting these elements in place. So the affine transformation needs 3 links, at least 3 links. The more you give it, the better off it is, but at least 3 links. And literally, once I do that, if I have 3 links in here, it allows me to go and say, okay, let's transform this. And it will attempt to georeference. It will attempt to go and adjust this so that it fits against the parameters that I set. And it will go and transform it. Okay? The affine transformation works pretty well. You have to be real careful with what you're doing. Oftentimes it may not be exactly what you're looking for. And notice this point never moved, even though it moved the whole thing 60 feet. That one never moved out there. Let's go and make it, well, maybe it's a similarity transformation and see, okay, it's kind of close, but this doesn't connect up to where it's supposed to connect up. So maybe that's not what I want either. So what about rubber sheeting? Well, I can do a rubber sheet transformation on here and it's close, but it may not be exactly what I'm looking for. Again, these are all different types of transformations that are part of this transform tool. Again, I can do a nearest neighbor transformation, do any of those. So that's the first part of this align parcels tool, is it uses these linkages that you create on here and tries to get the points to go into the right position on here. First part. All right, let's go ahead and select all these linkages in here. And by the way, let's clear this out. Select these links and clear these things out. Selection here and delete them. All right, so now I don't have them, so I have a clean. Let's select my record. The next part of it is the align features tool that I've already shown you. It will go and take and use a path that's selected for me and align them to that path. All right. Well, again, let me go and explain now. By the way, this case, it only says you just have to have that. That's fine. I just have to have that polygon in there. This I saw, I'm somewhere around 60 feet. And here, actually, it's more than 60 feet, if I remember. Yes, I got to go to like 65 feet when I looked at that. Okay. So I need to make sure that my points are all within that tolerance, that buffer that I'm setting as far as where it's going. And what this will do is this will go and attempt to create these linkages for me automatically. So I'm going to do this with the default setting on here with 1 foot. I'm going to tell it generate these linkages. Now note here, it said, well, wait a minute. That one, it's going to try and put it down here. So I'm going to change my setting and say not 65 and 1 foot. I'm going to go and make my second setting, my align features setting, at least half of my tolerance there. I usually actually just recommend just make it the same as your tolerance. And now when I go and do this, go ahead and do this again. Now, when I do this, notice it's not trying to put an anchor here. It's actually going to adjust it so it fits against that line. And over here to against this line, and it's moving this point, moving it down here relative to what it moves everything else in here. So the align parcels tool is a way to go and make things work and fit together. Understand what it's doing, but there's a couple of critical things. The points for the linkages must be within the tolerance, must be within this tolerance, and it's the reason why they're showing you that tolerance on there. All right. Secondly, make sure the point to edge snapping, you might as well go ahead and make it the same as you made that, just so that you can see where it's going to move them to the edge. Because if it uses the default setting, it's not going to do it correctly, especially as you get larger and larger components on here. I actually wish that Esri had set it up so once you add something here, it copies it here. Because often my clients, when they first start doing this, they use the 1 foot and it says this tool doesn't work. So no, they just, it hasn't been described well enough what the tool is doing. Once I do that, it then, one more thing, by the way, it's going to move whatever I have selected to here. So if I want to go and toggle it and move my existing data to where it is now, I'll go and I can click this and say toggle this. And you only have to select the polygon because it will use all of the topology to bring the lines and the points with it as it goes. Always do show preview. Okay. It's a really powerful tool, but like most really powerful tools, you kind of have to understand what it's doing for you to be able to go and say, ah, now I can use this thing. Get off of it. Questions?
Why did you not select an anchor point?
I didn't have to, well, because none of my existing ones, the anchor point goes and tells it, don't move this point.
Okay.
And I wanted every one of my points to move. If I had started with something that was connected to the boundary, I would have put an anchor point there. But because the anchor points basically just pin it down and say, don't move this on here. One of the things, well, you may not have noticed, but I noticed was that when I did it, because my second option, my point to lines, was so large, it actually, the aligned features actually went and corrupted this line here, this polygon here. I'm going to go and modify that and fix it. All right. So on here, go to align features here. This, seeing that this one got changed and modified on here. So maybe I only try half of that when I go and generate it. Generate the links in here. Maybe I need to tell it, yeah, there's, select my polygon. There it is. There's my links here. Do it to that. Go ahead and align it. And it didn't corrupt this here. Again, the amount that you do here, you just want to experiment with that a little bit just to see. and watch and see what actually happened on there. All right. This is a, go ahead,
sorry.
Eric. Go ahead,
How-
Erica.
How did you tell that that line was corrupted? Before you,
How could I tell?
yeah, sorry, I missed that
That's okay.
part. Thank you.
So let me see here. I never saved any of this stuff. So let's put it this way. My team, if I look at their data, they say, hey, Frank, can you look at this stuff just to let us know whether it looks right? I'll be looking at their data. And in fact, real quickly, I'll be able to go and see where they've got a problem and point it out to them. And they're like, how did you see that? I've been doing this stuff. As Dean says, Frank is old. Okay. He's older than Dean, right? So Frank is old. I've been doing this. I almost am embarrassed to mention this sometimes. I have been parcel mapping, almost 50 years. All right. I did it. I did it on linen. I did it on Mylar. I actually used RubyLith for a while when I first started parcel mapping. But I see, when I look at this data, I see patterns. All right. I see patterns all the time. So when I go and do this and I looked at this, I saw, and I get off of this, I saw that line there. That to me, oh, something happened. I didn't notice that before. What was going, it turns out that it corrupted that line.
Oh, okay.
Okay, that's what it was. If I go and select that, there it is there. And it should go all the way over to here. So
Oh,
it moved the line between the two. I saw that that pattern didn't look right anymore. So I said, no, that's not right. So, all right.
thank you.
Hey, Frank, I have a question.
Yes.
Oh, what would be a typical scenario where this would even arise to begin with, where you have this parcel floating out there, where you have to tie it on to the perimeter?
The reality is I just happen to float it out there as an example. The
Right.
reality is this occurs every time you go and use the traverse and try to make it fit against your existing data. Okay. Anytime you're inputting a new traverse, it's going to have to be adjusted to fit your existing data every time. Every time. You will have to do an adjustment, a parcel adjustment to make it fit. Never in my 50 years has it been exactly the same. If I've got something new coming in, there will be differences in bearings, there'll be differences in distances, there'll be all sorts of differences on there. You always will have to go and make the adjustments, even if it's something as simple as, and I'll use this same one here, that maybe go redo that one. Maybe it's as simple as that line is the same. It was described that way on the traverse, but this point here doesn't match up with the existing data that I have. I will be using this parcel adjustment, maybe not with that extensive a change, but I will be using the parcel adjustment to go and make sure that it fits together against that. Go ahead and generate the links in here. And maybe go into its 20 feet in here. Generate the links. Oh, wait. So that's the other thing. Another little tip. This generate links allows it to reevaluate the settings that you do. So as I go in here and change my settings, I will go back and automatically generate links again and let it see what happens in here. So if I only had, for example, 10-foot offset here, I'll tell it generate the links and it'll show me this here. And as I zoom in on this, you can see what's happening. With 10 feet, it did not collect and did not intersect that point. So I then went in and said, well, let's go to maybe 15 feet or 20 feet, regenerate it. There it is there. Get it back 1 foot, regenerate. That's still disconnected. Let me go 10 feet, regenerate. Nope, still not far enough. 15 feet, regenerate. There you go. Now I know that I've cleaned it up. So literally every single time you input a complete traverse to go and put it into your data, you will have to do an align parcels on there. Just sort of to go and finish that on here. This is it. When you get a complete traverse, a meets and bounds description, point of beginning to point to end, you really don't know where that is. You kind of have a sense of where it is, but you don't know exactly where it is. Anytime you do a complete traverse and you create the lines, close the traverse, create the seed, build it, check, make sure it fits exactly. And to do that, you want to go and do an align parcels. Now, with my second workflow, I know that this meets and bounds, this is where it's saying something south of a line or east of a line, or where it's just using existing, but it's just referencing a new line, then you don't have to do a line. It's only when you're creating it from scratch and you're doing the entire parcel, and you're trying to figure out how does this thing fit in. Almost, again, you will always have to go and do that. Learn that tool. All right. Boy, we went over a lot today, didn't we? Still a couple tools in here we have to go over. That's align parcels and align features, how they interact with one another, and the transform tool.
One comment on some of that we do as far as checks, because we don't have Frank to review our data when we put them in, is that we will compare the map area against the COGO area. And if we're in a subdivision on a 1 to 100 scale map, we say, look, the square footage has to be within so many square feet of what was legally described if our COGO is any good after the adjustment. And so that way we can just check, did we really mess something up? And then there's other, and so that's something to look at and establish those based on your map scale 1 to 400, because you could have more area wise, you could have bigger areas there. And that's something I'm playing around with the validation tools that will be available to folks. And then the last one, Frank, and maybe you can address this next week because we're past 12, is that our newer data, if they have control points, are going to be the better data. And so the adjust plays both ways. And so there's some things
it does.
It
It's going to adjust whatever is selected. So you could go either way with that. So yeah. All right. So I'll stop the recording for today. Remember homework for next week.